I believe you said that the ocean is rising. Each year rises a little bit, and that's been going on as long as anyone knows. Wouldn't it follow then that the freshwater levels have been falling, assuming a constant amount of water on the Earth's surface? That is, the oceans rise, the salt water rises, the freshwater supply, the Great Lakes and so on, should be falling at the same time, which is what I would expect. Basically, the water evaporates from fresh water and it goes over the ocean, and the water falls in the ocean. Is that correct?
There's, as you know, a more complex water cycle involving evaporation and melt that involves, currently right now, for example, there's some research that's going to be published soon involving an argument about seawater is not able to freeze. And so I'd say that the question is open. Would it be logical what you're saying? Could be. But we're talking about a much larger water cycle. For example, let me just expose the illogic of it, your logical position. Sea levels are actually falling in some places. Now, logically, sea levels should rise uniformly or fall uniformly, but we know, in fact, they're not. Some of that's due to land subsidence and some, for example, London is sinking, and some atolls in the I think, southeast, in the Indian Ocean are rising. But also in Tuvalu, where they want to go to Australia for the welfare, in New Zealand, and they're claiming they're being swamped, actually sea levels are dropping. And it doesn't appear that that's because the islands are lifting. So I'm claiming, I can't answer it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know a whole lot about all of this, but I'm going to try to phrase this. It's kind of two questions. Greenhouse effect is one of those words that's thrown around. I don't necessarily know what it means, but it seems to mean something bad. But could it be that it's something natural which the Earth is trying to do to restore itself in some way to its pre-diluvian vapor canopy, natural state? What is exactly this greenhouse effect? Why is it considered bad?
I would suggest that the greenhouse effect is considered bad if you are a modern environmentalist, in that but for the greenhouse effect, we cannot live on Earth. So it allows life on Earth. The greenhouse effect distinguishes us from, for example, other uninhabitable planets like Mars. It's an oversimplification, but we need it. Now, the argument is that we would, and this is again an oversimplification, thicken the blanket. These gases don't actually trap heat in, but they absorb the radiation, and so more of it doesn't get out, but it re-radiates back down. The greenhouse effect is a wonderful thing. Historically we know. Al Gore said if your baby has a fever, you take it to a doctor. Babies have normal temperatures. Planets don't. Okay, ask an environmentalist, what's the Earth's natural temperature? Well, they can't tell you because it's never been stable. The greenhouse effect is, we can call it a self-regulating entity. Professor Lindzen has his proposed iris effect, where the Earth vents itself at the equator, excess heat, or it could be recovering, which presupposes that nature's in a struggle with man. I don't know if I accept that, but the argument is the greenhouse effect is not bad. Very few people say this, but they say greenhouse warming is alarming, not because of what we see today, but because of what we will see. But again, that's a hypothesis. That's not supported.
I was wondering, it seems that global warming is going to continue to be a hot topic regardless of the evidence against it. What do you think we can do as college students to aid in the unveiling of the things that aren't true, the fact that global warming is
number one would be to get Chris Harder's book, The Politically Incorrect Guide.
Start there, and I would challenge. Challenge authority, because this is dogma. I would write. You have to write letters to the paper so they don't get away with it. They say things like Bush refused to sign Kyoto. Clinton signed it on November 12, 1998. We only signed treaties once in this country, but we have a template. Bush has to be responsible for the weather. We heard that the U.S. is responsible for the Darfur massacre because it didn't rain enough there. Carry the one somehow. That was only the Secretary General of the UN. You have to just get engaged, write letters, challenge your professors, and I would say time. This doesn't help. Nobody can do much about this, but time is your best ally. Remember, it hasn't cooled in almost 10 years. Next year will mark the 10th anniversary since we've had new warming. We should celebrate. Actually, that's bad news. Warming's historically been good. I would stick to the facts, argue the facts, and whenever they say global warming is real, ask them what they mean, because that doesn't say anything.
And make sure we don't ratify the Kyoto Treaty.
Right. I can't talk about Senator McCain's candidacy for the presidency, but now that you raised it, don't ratify Kyoto.
Yes.
I just mentioned the Svensmark interview in the current issue of Discovery. I didn't talk about it at all. I mean, can you say how much credence you give to his ideas about the effect of the sun and cloud formation and cosmic rays and so on?
Right. Svensmark, in response to this Oreskes claim that there is no other theory, and the sun, solar activity correlates with surface temperatures, as do, in an inverse fashion, cosmic waves. Svensmark is a Danish scientist at the Danish National Space Academy. There are Danish astronauts, believe it or not. And he has produced some very compelling research that scientists I work with have gone over to Copenhagen to talk with him about, and they're convinced. They've never, you see the Great Global Warming Swindle, which is actually what that article is talking about. They previewed his work. I've got the slide. We're talking about a series of coincidences going back hundreds of years with every uptick and downtick. It's actually a reverse, but if you reverse the cosmic wave activity, it involves cloud formation, which cools the planet, and there were too many clouds in the Dark Ages, which is why high infant mortality, short lifespan, crops failed, Germans burnt witches, now just SUVs, to respond to the climate changing. But it's a perfect correlation, and CO2 concentrations do not. So correlation isn't causation. The number of U.S. patents issued correlate perfectly with temperature over the past 150 years.
Last question.
I'm just curious if you possibly think if you can see Bush jumping on the global warming bandwagon by the end of his term, just for political reasons.
To an extent, yes. We know that they will not do the Kyoto rationing thing. Kyoto is a global treaty covering 34 countries: Belarus, Slovenia, Slovakia, Luxembourg, Iceland, Belgium, don't forget them. All the industrial titans, just not China, India, Mexico, South Korea, Indonesia, Brazil, the U.S., Australia. We aren't going to do it. Nobody's going to do it. The Senate could ratify Kyoto tomorrow because Clinton signed it. Enough of the juvenile non-reportage. We signed it. But they won't because nobody wants to do that. However, the people in the White House tell me that, and this is a problem, we must agree to something before we leave office. This is the peril of worrying about how history will treat you the week after you leave office, as opposed to, I'll be Truman and they love me 40 years later. I want to be loved and sell books when I'm gone immediately. The staff are saying we must agree to something before we leave office, which is next year. And the peril of that mindset is, somebody will say, well, this is something, ergo we must agree to that. And the Europeans are insisting that that something be something that drags our economy down like theirs are. Europe's CO2 emissions, by the way, are going up much, much faster than the U.S.'s. U.S. CO2 emissions are at flat levels since 2000. And since 97, this is essentially the big lie. They claim they're spectacularly succeeding. Meanwhile, despite a moribund economy, their emissions are going up. Long explanation there. I cover a lot of it. He is going to do something. I think it's a very unwise theory that we need an international agreement that everybody does their own thing. Now, inherently, why do you need an international agreement? Well, because if the UN doesn't bless it, it doesn't exist. That's a dangerous mindset. But that's where they're coming from right now. It's legacy time.